Hey everybody, today we're going to introduce you to our new engine harness. This is a plug-and-play engine harness for Holley Efi. This harness is going to cover your small block Chevrolet, your big block Chevrolet, your 24XLS, your 58XLS, your Hemis, your 481X, anything with a similar architecture to Chevrolet is going to work with this harness, and we're going to show you how. We are bringing these to market here shortly. There's going to be a pre-order, probably put up in the next day or so. These are made in the USA by Americans, right? So not by illegals. They are everything here is manufactured in the USA. So this harness, I felt as if there was a need for this, okay? The current offerings on the market from the manufacturer are subpar, to say the least. The quality control isn't there. There's been some problems, and there was also some shortcomings with the original design. So we decided to tackle it and fix it. So I'm going to give you a rundown of what we have here. So this is your main engine harness, J1A, J1B. There is a fuse box built into this harness. Now this is a prototype. This will actually be heat shrunk. This is not going to look like this when they are shipped to you, but yeah, this is just a prototype. But there is a relay box in here, okay? So there's a waterproof relay box. There is 2 relays, and then there's 5 fuses, okay? So the first fuse is for ignition. So just your ignition circuit is actually independently fused. And then you've got passenger coils and injectors and driver coils and injectors. And then they're independently fused, okay? So the reason that we did this, and the reason I do this when I wire cars from scratch on custom builds, is because if you have a fuse pop for like the passenger side injectors or the passenger side coils, and you're still pouring fuel into it, there's a problem. So why not shut them both off together, right? So they are wired to their own relay for passenger coils and injectors on one, driver coils and injectors on the other. And then we've already fused our ignition circuit. So you're gonna have then there's a nice little handy dandy cover, a little mount hole there. Left enough lead here for you to be able to mount it this way, mount it next to the ECU, come off of the foot pad here, maybe come under here like that, something along those lines. Or if you wanted to just, set it right there on top. So I never liked the one little relay coming out and about 2 inches out of the harness. It never worked right. So anyway, then we've got a couple of loose wires. So you'll notice that everything's pretty big here, okay? So we've got a 6 gauge power feed here and an 8 gauge ground. These are going to go to, you can go to after your disconnect switch or direct to the battery if you don't have a disconnect in the car. And then this is going to go to your battery ground. You'll learn why here shortly. The red wire is going to go to your ignition source, right? So like if you're using a key or if you're using a switch panel, whatever it is, it's one little connection. Then you've got this loose green wire. We opted to make this at a 20 gauge so that nobody got the idea to power their fuel pump straight from it, right? So when you look at this, you go, okay, I definitely can't run a fuel pump from this. This is what's going to trigger a relay for your fuel pump. So if you got a mechanical fuel pump, you don't need to use this. Just tape off the end. If you have an electric fuel pump, you're probably going to want to use a big relay for it anyway. So this is what's going to trigger your relay. This is a 12 volt output to trigger your relay. This whole harness comes with extensive instructions. I don't think you'll be able to screw this up, hopefully, right? So, and then we've got a coil negative output and a points output if you were going to use an MSD box or something like that. But moving on. 2 CAN bus outputs, right? So 2 CAN bus connectors. No more need to try to hunt down a CAN bus splitter that's like next to impossible to find. They're built into the main harness, okay? If you notice, the leads for CAN bus break out early. Sorry. They break out early and they're longer, right? There's no point in having a CAN bus connector like stubbed right here when you're trying to fish this through somewhere tight or whatever. So we wanted to give you some length, make life a little bit easier. All of Holley's CAN bus items will plug right in and function like normal, okay? Next, we come down and we've got another breakout. This breakout here is for 3 different things, right? Well, 4 things, technically. The rest of the main harness, then we've got the O2 sensor. So this O2 sensor lead is about 12 inches longer than the Holley O2 sensor lead. The difference is that it's an actual usable length, right? So instead of having the O2 sensor lead come all the way in the harness and break out here up underneath the hood, you know, where you would run your main engine harness through, we've dealt with a lot of customers over the years that said, man, my O2 sensor's up in the front bumper and the harness, it just doesn't work. I got to cut this thing open, blah, blah, blah. So we've got an O2 sensor that breaks out early. So if you've got full length or like full length exhaust with like a long tube header, this can break out inside of the car and go a different direction than the engine harness. So this comes out earlier. And then something I forgot to mention, if you notice, one of the biggest gripes that everybody has is the labels on the stock harnesses from Holley. So all of our labels, and again, this is a prototype, so these labels on the ones that are getting shipped out will be slid back here and have clear heat shrink over top of them. But they're all adhesive line heat shrink labels that have a piece of clear heat shrink over top of them. So they're not just gonna fall off and turn into little flags that are laying all over the place. So every single thing is labeled and labeled correctly and not gonna just come off on you, right? You'll also notice with this harness is that it is not split loom, right? So most of the other harnesses out on the market, they are split loom. This is a full encapsulated loom. So if you do have to make up some slack, you can do so, and it doesn't just start blowing out of the harness everywhere. So the next thing that comes out of this breakout may look familiar to some of y'all. This is the power tap connector. Okay, so Holley started putting these into the main harnesses a couple years ago. This is going to give you 12 volt, 5 volt sensor ground and battery ground. This one's actually labeled, unlike the other manufacturer. And this is your input output harness. So we kept the same connectors here because there's some other offerings from other manufacturers or other people that sell them that are good quality that plug into these things. The difference that we did is we set this up so that it would offset from each other. So if you plug the connector in here and plug the connector in here with the Holley harness, it's like this, and it looks like crap. So what we did is simple fix, but it's just offset 6 inches from each other so that you can plug a connector in here. And by the time it reaches the backside of this connector, it's just wire, not any connector body, and then you can plug your connector in here. Made more sense. So this is your power tap and your input-output harness, okay? Again, all this will be covered in detailed instructions that you get with this harness. Moving on down, then we come into the main breakout, okay? So, one of the big downfalls to Holley's main engine harness is that it's got a trunk and then one wire breaks out, and then a trunk, and it goes down a little further and another wire breaks out. You're forced to route the harness exactly the way Holley wants you to. So let me move some of this stuff down. Let's get some room on this table. So what we have here is a single main breakout, okay? So my thought process with this is that if you were gonna come through the firewall, you could come through the firewall somewhere around here, right? And if anything's a little bit too long here, you can individually pull leads back and shorten them up. So, is this harness longer than Holley's main harness? Yes. Is it a lot longer? No. It's only about 7.5 inches longer to the main breakout. The difference here is that all of this is usable, okay? So, we've got intake air temperature, and it breaks out at this main breakout, so that if your intake air temp is at the front of the intake manifold or on the charge pipe, it's going to reach. We've got, you know, your fuel pressure, you've got your oil pressure, so it can go all different directions right from the firewall. So this stuff can come out and fan out whichever way it needs to get to your items in your engine bay, okay? We've got, the only thing that's not broken out early, because it makes sense, is the throttle position sensor connector and the idle air control motor. So this is wired for a GM LS idle air control motor, because those are about the best ones on the market, and then your standard LS style 3-pin throttle position sensor. We will be offering some adapter harnesses for throttle position sensors, and we'll also be offering some adapter harnesses for map sensors. We opted to use, well, it was my decision, I opted to use the GT150 style, like pressure transducer style map sensor connector. The reason being is, this is what I use on every single car we wire. We don't use the junky stuff from a 250,000 mile Tahoe or none of that. We use a good quality 1/8 inch NPT screw in pressure transducer style map sensor. There's plenty of manufacturers that make them. This is the connector that's already made for them. What I see the majority of people doing is they buy a harness from somebody, from Holley, and then they wind up cutting this off and ghetto crimping some stuff on here to fit this style connector. So we just took that out of the equation. No more ghetto crimps, right? Okay, so some of the main changes with our harness versus everybody else's. And it really comes down to these 4 connectors. So our harness kit, when you purchase it, is going to come with the main engine harness, the coil sub harness, the injector sub harness, and ignition sub harness. It's going to be complete, so you won't have to buy anything else. This is all be top quality stuff that you get, that you plug in and not have any concerns with. So here's the differences. Our coil harness, if you notice, is a different plug than what you've ever seen before, okay? So what this is this is a hybrid planform plug. So we have 5 20 gauge wires here, right? So we have 4 triggers and 1 ground for your coils. And then we've got 2 pins here that are high amperage for power and ground. So you guys with smart coils, or stock coils that you're really leaning on, you should be supplying a larger gauge feed for power and ground to your coils, okay? So Holley came out with what they call a big wire coil kit. What we decided to do was adapt that and put that into our main harness built in. So there's no additional having to run wire outside of it, okay? So the feed wire for power and ground is 12 gauge in the harness per bank, okay? So you got 12 gauge per bank for power and ground. In your main harness, it goes back to your fuse box back here, your relay box back here, and it's all done. We'll get to the sub harnesses once we explain the rest of this. The next thing, the injector harness, okay? So this is your injector connector. So this will not work with a Holley injector harness, but you don't want it to because it's subpar. So look at that connector. That is the same thing. It's a hybrid planform connector. So it uses 18 gauge wire to trigger instead of 20 like everybody else. We use 18 gauge wire to trigger our coils, and then we've got 2 14 gauge wires, 1 per bank of injectors feeding this connector. So something I've proved over and over again with cars that I've wired over the years, anytime you get into these big methanol injectors, they are amp hungry, okay? So they are power hungry. And if you wire them properly, the engine runs quite a bit better. So using the plug and play harness from Holley is typically a problem. There's probably some testimonials to that on our website if you want to check that out. But big injectors like the billet atomizers, AFIS injectors, the Moran injectors, any of them, they're going to gain a lot more response by using a harness like this, okay? Last but not least, this is our injector connector, or I'm sorry, ignition connector, okay? So our ignition connector has got your cam, your crank, 12 volt, 5 volt, and sensor ground and IPU ground all into one connector. And this is what makes this universal for all of the Chevrolet big block, small block, GMLS 24X, 58X, 481Xs. You know, if you got a crank trigger and a cam sync, if you got a belt drive, This is how we make this universal for just about everything, okay? So that leads me to our sub harnesses. So let's look at sub harnesses here. We'll get to these here in a second. This is more of a tech geek thing. Let's look at a 58X harness, okay? So here's a 58X. These are appropriate length to reach your cam and your crank. They are properly labeled, right? So they plug right in. And then here's your ignition sub harness. It is already done. So it is 58X is being powered with 5 volt and getting ground from sensor ground instead of IPU ground. There's no splicing, there's no nothing like that. It's all shielded. Say you take your 58X engine that you just got from LKQ with 375,000 miles on it, and you yeet a rod out of that thing. But you got a 24X sitting right next to it on the floor. You call us up, you say, hey, Devin, Laura, I need a 24X sub harness. I got you. Okay, there we go. 24X, boom. We plug it in, change it in the software. It's now being fed with 12 volt. It's being fed with IPU ground the way it's supposed to be. The connectors have changed, the lengths have changed because of where it should land in the engine. You're done, right? So you can keep these things on you, right? So if you're gonna be blowing stuff up, like so many guys like to do with the LS stuff, they buy an engine for 200 bucks and they grenade it, boom, 24X, 58X. Then you decide, you know what? It's time for me to put a small block Chevrolet, a conventional small block Chevrolet, or a big block Chevrolet, whatever it may be, in the car. Done. Boom. You're done. Okay? So you didn't change anything else. You keep your injectors the same, you're keeping your coils the same, whatever it may be. You now are set up for a big block Chevrolet with a crank trigger and a cam sync. So no more cutting into your harness, hodgepodging it together. My hope is that when you buy this harness, if everybody bought this harness, everybody that's on the Facebook groups for Holley, we won't have to see those questions anymore. We won't have to see them. It'd be amazing, right? We won't have to see the posts anymore of what wire do I cut and what do I braze together over here to make this freaking cam work with this sensor. No, buy my harness. Come on, man. Buy my harness, all right? That's all you gotta do. You're done. Works. All right. So let's look at some more sub harnesses. This is the crank sensor that you'd be using with your big block or small block Chevrolet or a 481X. This is its different style crank sensor. Maybe you have a 36-1. This is for a flying magnet. Just examples, okay? Now, let's look at some more sub harnesses. So here we've got our coil sub harness for stock coils, right? So we got stock coil sub harness. We've got a 10 gauge lead that comes off of the coil harness that goes to your cylinder head ground. You've got your sub harness connector here, fed with 12 gauge power. Boom. It's labeled nice, right? Driver side coils, passenger side coils. No more odd and even, because most of you guys, you know, I mean, I get it, but sometimes people get confused and they plug in the odd and the even wrong, right? Well, now we've got passenger side and driver side. So if you sit in the car and you're the driver, right? And if you know what, I got to point this out here. If you're like in a different country and you buy these, it's our passenger side and driver side in America. Okay, it's America passenger side and driver side, not Europe passenger side and driver side. So keep that in mind. But anyway, plug these in, good to go, right? Smart coils, IGN-1A smart coils. Here we go. Let's look at the 2 coil connectors. You'll notice that we don't have a pin right here for our stock coils, and that's because it does not require a battery ground, right? But our stock coils, but our smart coils do require a battery ground. This already terminated. Boom. Big wire coil kit, done. Plug it in, ready to rock and roll. Same deal, we got a 10 gauge loose wire going to the cylinder head ground. You're done, okay? Last but not least, injectors. I've only got an EV1 injector harness left. We've sent out a bunch of these to people for some testing, and we sent out a couple different styles of injector harnesses, but you get the idea. Here's our injector harness. I did this the way I do them, which is let's go underneath the intake manifold and branch out from the center of the intake manifold. You got a really low intake manifold, then go all the way around to the front. whatever you want to do from the back. It's good to go. Something else I want to point out, the sub harness for injectors is pretty awesome. This is a dual locking design. Click, click. Now you can tow your Buick with that thing, okay? You can tow a Buick with that, boom. That's a good quality connector. You are out there towing with this thing. Don't do that, I'm kidding. Seriously, do not tow your freaking Buick with this thing. But you get the point. Good quality waterproof connector. Yeah, what you will be getting when you order up one of our harness kits, you will get your choice of injectors, okay? Your choice of coils. So if you've got smart coils, it's a drop down on the website. Click it and then choose smart coils or choose stock coils, right? Then you'll choose your engine type, right? So do you have a conventional engine with a cam sync and a crank trigger? Do you have a 24X? Do you have a 58X? Keep in mind, you 24X and 58X LX guys, when you get sick of those cam sync errors and the crank sync errors because you bought a dart block and the sensors don't wind up right, you order up this harness and you put a crank trigger on it and you're done, okay? So you'll select your ignition type, right? So your engine type, and you click buy. All this comes $1,000 shipped free. You'll also be included with a whole bunch of instruction. You'll have a whole manual, plus you'll have support from us. We're also doing a dealer/installer network, right? So that's going to be, we've got a handful of dealers and installers that we're going to be working with. I will make that in a post, and on our website. So if they're closer to you, you've already got a working relationship with them, whatever you want to do, you can buy from them as well. So I encourage you to buy from them because they make a couple bucks on it and you've already got a working relationship with them, so make it happen, right? Last but not least, I want to show you the ultrasonic welds and the way that they're supposed to work, right? So these are ultrasonic welds that are inside of the harnesses, okay? So that's a proper ultrasonic weld. All of our joints inside of these harnesses are ultrasonic welded. Then they're covered with an adhesive line heat shrink. They are not like the ultrasonic welds that are done elsewhere, right? So these things are very, very, very strong. But this is the proper way to do an ultrasonic weld, right? And that's with the whole harness, every single crimp, every single joint in the harness is done this way. So I just wanted to show you that. All of these harnesses will come with a Cirrus high pot test report, which means it's tested with resistance across the entire harness. And everything has been confirmed that it is pinned correctly on a high dollar machine, not by a $7.50 an hour employee. So hopefully this answers all your questions. If you got any questions, let us know. We'll be happy to help. See you.